Are you going to record on there?
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Meant to. It says before. Still, second time will be better. If everybody's taken it, I think it'd be, if you've already taken it and we were to record it the second time, I think it'd be fine to let people have it the second time. So, this is not where I decided to start. So the adductors are attached between the pelvis and that long spine on the back, primarily of the femur. There are quite a few adductors, and because you have these different orientations, so in this representation you don't have the pectineus and you don't have the gracilis. This is primarily for the adductor magnus, but you also have the brevis. So, and the longus. So the longus attaches here to here, brevis here to here, and the superior fibers of the magnus, and this is what's important, are all the way up at the top, and the inferior fibers of the adductor magnus are all the way at the bottom. And you notice the difference in direction of fibers. Obviously these, they used to be called the adductor minimus. Yeah, because they thought of it as a different muscle, but now we all call it the same muscle. But it obviously is not doing the same thing as these fibers. There's no way. It's very important to understand. Here are other adductors. Technically, the sartorius is an adductor. This is the biceps femoris, and here we have that's the semimembranosus. Here we have the gracilis, and that's the important part of this picture. The gracilis is attached all the way down past the knee. So one of the adductors attaches down past the knee. And all of these fibers, if you notice, they come down and cross. That's the semitendinosus is what it is. They come down and cross onto the tibia. So it's like they externally rotate the knee at the same time as flex the knee. They externally rotate the tibia, I should say, at the same time as flex the knee and create adduction. So I want to illustrate that because of something I'm going to show you in just a minute. Actually, I'm going to show you right now. So what you'll notice here, oh yeah, because we've already gone through it, is the IT band. Earlier I showed you, it attaches to the tibia here, but it has fibers. They call it, I can't remember, it's a French name. The fibers that come across to the anterior spine of the tibia. So they then have some relationship to the fibers of the sartorius and gracilis on the opposite side. So it's like they create a real reins like a horse. The latissimus dorsi and pec major are a little bit different, but these actually are organizing the movement of the tibia relative to the femur. And when one of them pulls in this direction, the other one feels tension and knows. When the other one pulls in this direction, the other one feels tension and knows. And they're both attached at the pelvis. So the internal-external rotation of the knee in a very large and important way is both sensed and influenced, less influenced than sensed, but by the muscles of the pelvis so that they can constantly organize this coordinated movement that I'm talking about. And they call this one the goose's foot, but it's another French name. That's the important part of this. Oh, there's one other part, and that is that this is the biceps femoris, one of the hamstring muscles. And have we been through the hamstrings? Yeah. It attaches, and what they're missing in this picture is also an expansion to the tibia. That is what I talked about before. with the different angles, and it's talking about a weak point in the pelvis. So for instance, when you're crossing your legs, you're exposing a weak point in the pelvis. That's something I'm going to talk more about tomorrow. I think it's important to understand, but the pelvis is extremely stable except for in some coordinated positions and muscle actions, in which case you can begin to pull the head of the femur more easily out of position with the acetabulum. We'll talk about that tomorrow. The adductors all express this adducting influence, but what I think is very important to understand is that because of the varying attachments to the femur, with the adductor magnus being the adductor magnus, I'll just tell you, I guess that was my point. This fiber that comes from the most posterior portion of the pelvis. So it attaches where the hamstrings attach essentially. And it attaches in front at the, on top of the femur, at the portion of the femur like this. So here's the knee. It sticks out. It's the medial condyle on top of it, and as far forward as any of the adductors attach, well, except for the gracilis, but it attaches to the tibia. But so it's attached the most posteriorly on the pelvis and the most anteriorly on the tibia, whereas the most superior fibers are attached the most posteriorly on the tibia and the most anteriorly on the pelvis. So it's like you have the attachment of the upper portion that can create flexion of the hip and the lower portion that can create extension of the hip. Also, it's the case that this is going to provide a lot more adduction because the fibers are running more horizontal, more power in adduction than this is. And this is going to be likely to create more internal rotation of the hip, and this is going to be likely to create more external rotation of the hip. So within this single muscle that's shaped like a giant fan and creates this long sheath, it's like, since these muscles would need to be removed, it's like you have a smooth, long canal sort of presented by it. You have a whole lot of different range of motions that are able to be presented by this single muscle. In different positions, you're going to have different parts of that muscle being able to be more active because, for instance, in order to stretch the inferior portion, I would be in this position, and in order to stretch the superior portion, I would be in this position. You will end up being able to use some of the fibers when they're more tense in certain positions and use other of the fibers when they're more tense in other positions. And that is just an important concept to understand, and it applies to some extent all of the adductors as a system, which is illustrated in this sort of a picture. That each of these adductors provide together adduction, but it isn't like you have a single adductor or a single hamstring. Everybody knows that, but each of these adductors has the orientation it has so that when you're in different positions, when you're in this position, you're going to have very little influence over some of them, and the fibers that are more horizontal are going to be able to begin having more influence in adduction. So you always have this like passing, very uniform passing of activity through these systems, and the way that it's organized is through the connective tissue matrix. So within this space that we've now explored, with the quadratus lumborum, the psoas, the iliacus, all of the muscles of the abdomen, we have the diaphragm creating the superior surface, and we have this pelvic floor. We also have a lot of nerves passing through, obviously. All of these nerves passing out of the sacrum are passing through, not in this picture, but they're passing through the piriformis. A lot of the muscles passing through the lumbar plexus, a lot of the nerves are passing through the psoas, literally through the muscle belly. So the psoas needs to be able to contract and do all these different movements all this different rotation, and these nerves are free to not be moved at the same time, and that's organized by the connective tissue matrix. We have the aorta passing down the lumbar spine in direct relationship with the psoas, the vena cava is in direct relation with the psoas. All of these organs that are in here are also. Here we have an important relationship I want to illustrate. As we saw earlier, we have this capsule of the hip, and we have three important ligaments that reinforce it. But here we have the attachment of the gluteus minimus. This large muscle attached to the kneecap, the patella, attaches here to the pelvis, the inferior anterior iliac spine. And so what it does, it's cut away in this picture. What it does is it both flexes the hip and extends the knee. It's called the rectus femoris. The thing is, a lot of people think that's all it does, but here is the actual attachment of the rectus femoris. It has three tendons, one of which is attaching directly to the glute minimus's attachment at the greater trochanter, one of which, if you were to flip it up, this is this portion right here flipped up, attaches directly at the junction of two of the large reinforcing ligaments of the capsule. So that means when you extend your knee, you actually create more tension so that it reinforces, it creates that pressure that you want at the hip to protect the femur. So the whole system is organized so that during any muscle action, you have influence. If you think about it, it's like this muscle is pulling this way to create tension with the gluteus minimus, pulling this way on the spine, but at the same time, it's like it's pulling directly up, creating tension on the spine. It works in conjunction with the psoas, and so simultaneously, you have the psoas pushing back on the same area that this was pulling forward with this bursa, reinforcing those ligaments. So you have this coordinated system of action where one muscle that's extending the hip, the knee, and flexing the hip is actually simultaneously pulling on the hip capsule forward because it's attached back to the femur and to the pelvis. And you have another muscle acting with it, the psoas, that's pushing back on the hip capsule with the pelvis. And by creating this very complex system of tension and pressure, we end up allowing these bones to essentially be floating within the system. So it's not like the joint is a bone having to rotate along another bone with all that pressure. It's like between the two bones, between the cartilage between the two bones. It's like we have the ability with our body to be pulling everything in every direction, so it's like it's being floated, like the spine, like the bony elements are being floated by a system of tension around them at all times. And that is an important concept, I think, with anatomy to have as you're studying. Obviously, all of these muscles have a lot of important relationships to the genitals, to the vascular system, to the nervous system, and to all of the organs of the pelvis and the organs of the abdomen. Here's a really good illustration of what I said before with the hamstring muscle. Here's the semitendinosus, and that's attached to the pelvis. We have the adductor here, the gracilis, that's attached to the pelvis, and we have the sartorius attached to the pelvis, and they're creating this long fibrous attachment with a lot of sensitivity and understanding through tension to the tibia below the knee. Here we have the biceps femoris here's the attachment that they forgot in the last one, an attachment from the biceps femoris to the tibia as well. That's all it's important. Another important illustration of this complex network, which is why I decided I really want to have an opportunity to show you in this, because if we did a whole class on the hamstrings, you'd be able to get it. But if I try and go through all the hamstrings, all the adductors, what's important in this class is to get that the knee's integrity, the knee's health is so heavily influenced by the pelvis. So if we don't have the pelvis in a good position, or we're trying to put our knee and our pelvis in a really position that we think is the correct one for the pose, but it's not the correct one for us, we might be creating havoc within the joints themselves. And I know that this is something that you guys are told, that's why I'm teaching at this school, is because it's a school that I assume all schools are probably something like that, especially the ones I know of here in St. Louis. I mean, I attend some of the yoga seminars strictly because they're the most sensitive. The fitness industry is very difficult for me to interact with it. They're the most sensitive to a lot of the important community issues that need to be addressed through health. So here is the attachment of the semimembranosus. That's one of the large hamstring muscles. I'm going to find it real quick. Before I go on, I know I didn't show you the hamstring, so I have to show it at least once. There we go. Oh yeah, I was showing you this. That's good. Here's the hamstring muscles. So this is the biceps femoris. It attaches to the lateral portion of the fibula. So you could immediately find a relationship through that to the ankle, but we won't do that today. But it attaches to the fibula, a little bit to the tibia as well. Then you have the semitendinosus, which is attached to the that portion that reaches around that I've already shown you. And then the most interesting of the muscles to me is the semimembranosus, which you can barely see poking out here. And it attaches to the most lateral portion here, and it's named semimembranosus because of its membrane-like tendon of origin. So it's sensitive to the tension when it moves forward, backward, out, in. It's like it knows at all times where the ischial tuberosity is in the movements of the pelvis. Then it attaches down here, and that's what I'm about to show you. Here we are. It attaches down here. It's really hard to find a picture that does a good job of illustrating this. I've been all over, but even while it doesn't do a great job of illustrating, it shows you that there are 5 tendons, inferior tendons of this one muscle, the semimembranosus. Those 5 tendons have attachments that go around to the front of the tibia, so they're pulling the tibia in internal rotation. Okay? It has attachments that come right back up and attach to the fibula, so that it can feel the tension of closure of the knee closing or opening at all times itself. It has a tendon that comes across and attaches to the opposite side of the knee. So it's like it could pull it in internal rotation. It can't pull it in. It can't pull the tibia in external rotation. That knee is very, very heavily associated with the capsule. So they call it the capsular attachment. But it comes across, and its fibers are in direct relationship with the popliteal ligament and tendon of the popliteus muscle, this big muscle here. You see? That's very important for what I'm about to show. And this is how highly tuned the system has to be. In order for those 5 tendons, they're obviously showing that this muscle wants to know the micro movements of these 2 bones. We think of the knee as going like this. This tendon wants to know how much those 2 bones are going like this, how much they're going like this. It has the understanding through its connective tissue of the knee in all ranges of motion. And this is the big attachment of the semimembranosus, and a good illustration of its connection to the tissue of the posterior knee capsule, because it's like it's very what do you call it? Associated with it, like it's like a part of the wall itself. But here it's attached directly to the medial meniscus. The meniscus is like a cartilage that keeps the condyle moving along the other condyle appropriately. If you move your knee and that meniscus doesn't move back, okay, when you're flexing your knee, then the meniscus gets run over and you end up with a damaged meniscus. It's very common. Medial meniscus is very commonly damaged. The job of coordinating the movement and orientation of the medial meniscus is the semimembranosus, that huge hamstring muscle that looks like it's just full of force, is delicately balancing. If I move my knee this much, it needs to know to pull it back only that much. If I move my knee this much, it needs to pull it back more. It needs to know exactly at all times how to coordinate the orientation of this tiny structure within the knee capsule itself. It's attached. And at the same time, it needs to know what's the balance with the other meniscus, because the popliteus muscle is what's attached. So here's the attachment. Here's a really good illustration of the ligament. Here, the ligament's pulled away, and there is the meniscus that it's attached to. And here's the popliteus muscle, and it is attached to the medial meniscus. So its sensitivity of the ligament and tendon associated with that meniscus, the muscle that moves it, are coordinating the movement of the medial meniscus at all times. And there's a reason for that, and it'd be in a course about the knee. But what I wanted to illustrate is that this network of complex musculoskeletal structures are coordinated so well that the most tiny micro movements of rotation in a meniscus being shifted perfectly can be done by any muscle. It's not like a big stupid muscle, because the muscle itself doesn't create the response. It's the tension of the connective tissue itself that's organizing all of the actions within the intramuscular coordination. This fiber knows to contract this much while these fibers are doing something completely different. That sort of idea. The different fiber portions of the muscle can act as though they're completely different muscles, in a sense. So here's a good illustration of all of the nerves, all of the muscles that are associated with the pelvis. It's like it creates this big, huge network that is obviously very connected. So the nerves within that system are something I wanted to illustrate, because here we have a good picture of the sympathetic nervous ganglion that run along the aorta and along the lumbar spine. And their communication is in the psoas as well. But the important thing is just to understand the movement of your lumbar spine, nourishing and stimulating the quality of the connective tissue of your sympathetic nervous system, has huge implications on your organ function, on the your emotional state, and that we need to have these movements. That yoga is providing the opportunity for balanced movements to stimulate the experience of life and the function of our body in a very whole way. And that's key. I think I have a picture of, no, I'll have it later. So here is the femoral nerve passing out with the psoas again. Here's the pectineus, one of the adductors, attached to the ligament, both the Cooper's ligament as well as the Gibber-knot. But the idea is that this actually passes forward and down into the pelvic floor and organizes some of the tension of the fascia that's coordinating your genital system, your urinary system, and your rectum. Here is a big nerve, the sciatic nerve, passing out under the piriformis. The gluteus medius, it is creating a superior border for, that's the gluteus minimus. It's not provided well in this picture. But the gluteus medius provides a superior border for the piriformis. And the important thing to understand about that is just that if the piriformis is too tight, you can get a sciatica. You can have all types of compression of a lot of other nerves, veins, and that sort of thing. It's very important to have a good quality of piriformis in the connective tissue and in its function. But it's also the case that the gluteus medius is providing, in a sense, a structure that creates space. Because the gluteus maximus is over this, because we need to have space for this nerve to run, we need to have a good quality of gluteus medius, a good volume. It needs to be strong, not just because every time we step on one foot, it's carrying 2.5 times our body weight. More than that, because you have to do the other equation. But because the space that's created in this fascia is a large part the volume of the gluteus medius, which actually isn't here right now. And the other important thing to understand is that medius piriformis. I had something else. It's creating the space. You need to have a really good quality of gluteus maximus. While you need the space provided by the gluteus medius in this layering effect, the actual volume created by the gluteus maximus, sparing some of the pressure in this area, keeps, during a seated position, us from having a whole lot of pressure on the sciatic nerve as it passes down through here by creating volume in this space here. So the way the nerves all work, here's a final thing I want to talk about with the nervous system in relationship to the anatomy. That's called Walter's ganglion. That is the bottom of the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is what coordinates a lot of our organ function, a lot of our emotional experience of life as well, and our hormone function, all of our glands. And that is attached right at the joint of the coccyx. If you have a coccyx that's out of place, if it's bent one way or the other or flexed, that ganglion is not now in the correct tension relationship with the other ones. And it's the one that creates the balance between these two. If you have tension in the sacrum in one direction or another and tension on the coccyx in another because we have muscles attaching there, we can also have these disturbances that we're experiencing as problems. And it's the connective tissue matrix that's organizing the health and quality of the cells. So we don't necessarily have to fix the position of the coccyx to fix the function of the nervous system, but we need to stimulate the connective tissue through movement and stretching to nourish these cells, to allow for the fluids to reach them and to be removed when there's toxins. That's primarily the job of the connective tissue. We'll show that tomorrow in a video. Here's another important nervous relationship. Back up to the pelvis. You have these big ligaments between the lumbar vertebra, if you remember, and the ilium. And here is the obturator nerve passing directly between these two ligaments, shown well in this picture, but in reality, you don't have. There's the little hole it's passing through. In reality, you don't have a big space like this. If you end up with a problem because you have your pelvis is tilted like this and your sacrum's rotated in the other way, and then your lumbar spine has to side bend to keep you straight, you've just compressed that nerve. And you've got an obturator nerve syndrome, and most people aren't looking at the ligaments between the sacrum and the L5 and the ilium, but what we want is to use movement, to use coordination to begin stimulating all of these tissues in order to allow for the nerves to be healthy, to have the freedom they need, to have the nourishment they need in these ways. And it needs to be in balance, because if I'm moving a little bit, like for instance, a good movement for that would be to go like this. And if I'm moving like that, that's fine. But if I have one of those syndromes, I might try and move like that. Maybe more like this. If it's on this side. But then if I move a little, I'm not going past the amount, so we always have to think about how movement can stimulate good things by allowing the appropriate tension to be organized within the system, and how going past that's going to create a compensation. Something's going to give, something's going to allow the movement. It's like the weakest link analogy, it's like the weakest link